What's going on, y'all? Welcome to MMA Bros. I'm Nate.
I'm Elijah.
And today we'll be giving you our list of the greatest UFC fighters to never touch gold. And our criteria on our list is all the guys that have accomplished enormous accolades, records, or even just pure, like, defeating the rest of the division for the champ. And mainly, we're going to be going about people that haven't gotten the interim belt, but we're going to count guys that had the interim belt because it's not really the undisputed belt. So we do have a couple guys on this list, and we're going to be going by each division. And we're going to start off with flyweight. And on this, we think the greatest flyweight to never touch gold, I think it's a long shot too, is definitely Joseph Benavidez. Man has had 4 title fights. Not most of these guys have had 1 or 2. Like, you'll be lucky to get 1 in nowadays UFC. But he was definitely one of the pioneers of flyweight, just like DJ. And those are the people that he lost to, was DJ. And he also had fights against the likes of Dominic Cruz and Figgy. Granted, he lost those fights. And those are the only people he really lost to. He does have a loss to Sergio Pettis, but it was a very, very close fight, split decision. And I believe that Sergio Pettis ended up being a champion in Bellator. So it's not like he's losing to bums and people like that. And he really had, I believe he has one of the longest win streaks in flyweight, if not the longest. He also has the most knockouts, the most bouts in flyweight, period. So he definitely has that longevity in that division. And even so, like, even at his worst, he still looked great. Like, he's done amazing things, everything from submissions to knockouts. He was a great fighter. And I think it's a long shot. There's not many people that you could say that's better than him that never won the title. Like, most of the people you say, all the people that you say that are better than Joseph Benavidez are the champions and people that have become champ. So it was very easy for us to just look at this because honestly, he's probably one of the best on this whole list when it comes to his accolades in flyweight.
Yeah, and Benavidez, he didn't really he never really got finished throughout his career until he fought Figueiredo.
Yeah.
And that was like when he was old too.
Yeah.
So like, you can't even like say that, oh, he doesn't have a good chin or he gets finished, because he was out of his prime at that time. And Figueiredo, we see how good he is. He's top 3 greatest flyweights of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, not only that, but he had close fights with Henry Cejudo, like you said. Mm-hmm. And that fight could have went either way. But he did beat Cejudo regardless. So
he also beat Alex Perez as well. Alex Perez is number 5 currently.
Yeah.
Granted, it was Alex Perez a few years ago, but it still shows the amount, the longevity, because he's been fighting since the beginning of the division started with DJ. And it's kind of crazy to even think about it. If it wasn't for DJ, Benavidez would have been a champ, 100%.
Yeah.
So it was very easy for this one to say, because Benavidez has been in the game and not enough people give him respect. So I feel like
not enough people give him respect because they look at Benavidez and they just think about his losses. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't think about his wins, because he actually does have good wins. He was beating everybody other than champions.
Yeah.
So he's definitely number 1, the best flyweight to never win a title when it comes to accolades and what he did. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we gotta give it to Benavidez. Now moving up to bantamweight, the greatest bantamweight to never win a title, in our opinion, is Uriah Faber. Because when you look at his career, it's very similar to Benavidez, whereas he got 4 title shots, lost all of them, but these were to really good fighters. Jose Aldo, Renan Barão twice, and Renan Barão was a beast too. He was top 3 bantamweights of all time.
Yeah.
So, you know, he only lost to really good fighters, and even whenever he was older in age, he started to kind of like evolve with the game, and he was even still having wins in the top 15 at an older age. And throughout his career, out of his 46 or something like that fights, he had like 22 title fights. And that's whenever you look at his fights out in other promotions, most of those title fights were in the WEC, which was basically the UFC before they ended up merging. So it kind of counts, but it really doesn't. We're talking about UFC here, but still, 22 title fights throughout his career. And Uriah Faber, he was just always in the top 10, in the top 5, fighting the best of the best and only losing to the best of the best.
Yeah.
So we got to give it to Uriah Faber.
He's definitely one of those guys. If it wasn't for Jose Aldo, just like for Benavidez with DJ, if it wasn't for Jose Aldo, Uriah would have been champion 100%. And it was Uriah was beating the guys coming up as well for Aldo, and it was easier for Aldo to pick his fights. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they were easier fights because Aldo had some tough fights as well, and it made it where he always kept showing up every single time. Whenever it came down to when his name was called, he would go in there and show out. And even a lot of his losses, he didn't look bad. They were pretty close fights. Some of them he looked pretty bad, especially later on in his career. But he still He beat dudes too that are currently in the UFC now, and they're still trying to make their way to the rankings, or they are in the rankings. So
like Ricky Simone knocked Ricky Simone out in the first round after he was out of his prime. So that's really impressive. And look at what Ricky Simone's doing now, only losing to the likes of Song Yadong and guys like that. So yeah, what he did was very impressive, especially at an older age to be able to beat a guy like Ricky Simone. Even that adds to his legacy.
Think about this: Uriah Faber, for over at least 10 years, has been in the top 15 in that division, and that goes to show a lot. Majority of those guys, the belt has been passed around, so it's like he's still there, still competing, and the only guys that are better than him on this list, out of all-time list, are the champions. And that's why we give it to Uriah Faber on this one. And next up on featherweight, we got Chad Mendes. And in my opinion, I feel like Chad Mendes is severely underrated as well, just mainly because towards the end of his career, he started getting finished. But you got to think about who he was getting finished by: Alexander Volkanovski, Conor McGregor. Earlier on was Jose Aldo beating him, and we know Jose Aldo's in the top 10 of the UFC of all time.
Top five,
actually, yeah. And it's hard to say when guys like this, he's going in there with Chad Mendes. This is literally Chad Mendes. He's going in there and knocking everybody out. And it's a smaller weight class. You don't normally see knockouts in the way of smaller weight class like this, but he was consistently a knockout guy.
And he started off as a wrestler.
And exactly. He showed his well-roundedness, especially later on in the midway point of his career, and he kept getting back to that title, knocking like 3-4 dudes out, title shot, and then 3-4 dudes out, title shot. And I think that went on a span like 2 or 3 times. And it's hard to say when someone gets 3 title shots, just like the past 2 guys we were talking about. It's hard not to put him up there. There's a reason why he got that many title shots. Some people get gifted title shots and they only get that one time. But he earned his title shots. He earned his way up in that division. And still, he's a pioneer to featherweight, I believe. And the fact that he's losing to these guys, the only guys he's losing to, I don't think anywhere on his career, no one on his losses in the UFC have been bums. They haven't been some journeymen. It's been legends, likes of Frankie Edgar, Volkanovski, Jose Aldo. So you gotta give him his respect. I don't hear a lot of people talk about him, but he was an exciting fighter, especially for a wrestler. And that he was one of the reasons why I was put onto the sport, as well as Jose Aldo, was because of them two, where I started watching these latter guys. Growing up, don't really know too much about fighting. You just see the big dudes fighting, and that gets you excited. But these are the guys that really opened those doors for what the division is today. So he's definitely, if it wasn't for Jose Aldo, he'd be champ. And that's what most of these guys.
Yeah, Chad Mendes, he's a pioneer of the featherweight division. Even though he never held the title, what he did in the division was revolutionary when you think about it. He really showed that him and Jose Aldo, they opened the eyes to the casual fans that these lighter weight class fighters are entertaining and can be very fun to watch. And that's what he did. And not only that, but he beat such high-level fighters, only lost to champions like Jose Aldo. So we got to give him respect. Chad Mendes, the best featherweight to never win a title in our opinion. Now moving up to lightweight, the best lightweight to never win a title in our opinion is Justin Gaethje. And I feel like you could also put Poirier there, but the only reason we say Justin Gaethje is because obviously Gaethje knocked out Poirier, but it's also that Poirier does have just one loss to Michael Johnson, getting knocked out by Michael Johnson in the lightweight division. Gaethje doesn't have any losses like that, not that at all. He doesn't have any losses to anybody that's not that good. Michael Johnson's good. I don't want to say Michael Johnson isn't that good, but Michael Johnson isn't a championship level fighter. And Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje are. And we see that throughout Justin Gaethje and Poirier's career, they've only lost two champions to very high-level fighters other than Poirier losing to Michael Johnson and Gaethje losing to Poirier and Poirier losing to Gaethje now. So, it's just a cycle of these two guys, really. Their careers are still going on. If Poirier goes out there and if he puts on a war with Islam Makhachev and loses, but still puts on a war, we probably put him over Gaethje.
Yeah, 100%. Hopefully we can take him off this list because we honestly want him to win the belt. But that's besides the point, honestly. Justin Gaethje, he's at the point where he's a money fight guy, especially taking that loss with Holloway, a smaller guy coming up the weight class. I feel like that kind of not necessarily tarnishes, but it definitely holds him back. If Gaethje takes some time off, he could probably end up getting the belt too, but it's going to get a lot tougher as years go on. He's not getting any younger. I mean, he's not too old, but he's not very young either.
Yeah, and I think I remember Gaethje even saying it himself that he doesn't have that much time. He only got a few more fights. So I think Gaethje, especially now after losing to Holloway, I think he's probably going to be thinking about just money fights. Yeah. And he's probably going to hang up the gloves soon. But
so we'll put Gaethje on here. They both honestly had interim title belts. Mm-hmm. They had the interim belt. They were technically not necessarily the champ, but the interim champion of that weight division. But they didn't touch real gold. Undisputed, the best of the best. There was always another guy that was already had it for them, and for this case, I believe it was Khabib and Oliveira. So, and we know how Oliveira is. Oliveira would have been on this list if he never won the belt, but he won the belt and he defended. So, these guys, the only ones that are better than him are the champions. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why, and it's both of these guys. That's why that division is so weird the way it is to this day. It's because of them two. You can add Michael Chandler to the mix, but Michael Chandler doesn't have the resume like these guys got. Dustin Poirier fought from the bottom and knocked out majority of people. He knocked out McGregor. He beat McGregor two of the three times. So, and it's hard to say. It's hard to say which one or the other. That's why we have both of them here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and whenever you look at their wins, such high-level wins. I mean, Poirier knocking out Benoit Saint Denis. A lot of people were doubting him. I was doubting him. Nate, you were doubting him. We were all saying that Poirier was going to get demolished, and he went out there and knocked out Benoit, which is very impressive. And Justin Gaethje knocking out Poirier. Well, who else we got? We got Michael Chandler. Pretty much demolished Michael Chandler as the fight went later on. Poirier, same thing, kind of took over as the fight went on and started to finished Michael Chandler. Gaethje wasn't able to finish Michael Chandler, but these guys have such high-level wins. They beat everybody unless you're a champion, and or they're fighting each other. Either they're fighting each other or they're fighting a champion, and that's when they lose. So that's why we got to put them at number 1 and 2 of the greatest lightweights to never win a title.
Yeah, and with my opinion, I mean, I don't mean to just go off on a little rant here again, but he also, I feel like the fact that he was knocking out Gaethje, I'm talking about Barbosa, Tony Ferguson, and an upcoming guy that is still there. He knocked out Fiziev. He's getting contenders and still putting him on their butt. He's the reason why Tony Ferguson is not who he is anymore. Like, if people don't realize, after that fight, what Gaethje did with him, Tony Ferguson wasn't the same person anymore. So the fact that he did that and changed, he helped change that landscape in the lightweight division. So that's why we believe he's number 1. Next up, we got welterweight. And this one's a bit of a toss-up. And the comments, and people might get mad at me if I don't mention one of these guys, but our choice was Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And the other guy could arguably be Kobe Covington, but he'd be the reason why he's not on this thing. We'll put him as an honorable mention. Mainly, I don't like the guy, but we got to respect what he did. He did great, and he threw off the rest of the old heads. You know what I mean? At the point where it was like these guys are towards the end of the career, like Tyron Woodley, RDA, and Robbie Lawler. These guys were already at the end of their career, so it wasn't like he got the full effect, the full prime of these guys, especially Robbie Lawler. If Robbie Lawler was in his prime, I believe he could have gave it to Kobe. But the reason why we give it to Stephen Thompson is more so because of the recency. He's doing more than Kobe. Kobe's not an active fighter. He don't fight contenders, which is lame, Mm-hmm. Champions fight more contenders than he does.
Colby's ducking Ian Gary.
He's ducking Ian Gary right now as well, trying to talk about some stipulations. That doesn't matter though. Wonder Boy, he just knocked out Kevin Holland. You know, he did get recently submitted by Shavkat, but Shavkat's the young blood, and Wonder Boy's pushing 40. So
and honestly, Shavkat, I mean to cut you off, but Shavkat probably right now is the best submission artist in the welterweight division.
I think probably if he keeps going, he'd probably be the best submission artist of all time. By the way, besides the point, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, the greatest karate. You never seen karate in any form of MMA succeed, and he shows that it can succeed with a little bit of tweak to his stance, a little bit, and his IQ. He's knocking out dudes like Robert Whitaker, beat Jorge Masvidal, beat Vicente Luque, Jeff Neal, guys that are currently right now in the top 15, and he's been fighting for so many years. So his longevity really adds to this as well, and he's knocked out a lot of these guys. And it's not like he's just getting some boring decision. He fought for the title as well against Tyron Woodley twice. First fight was a decision or a draw. Very, very close fight. Could have went either way. That's why I gave it a draw. Second fight, some people say that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson could have won that fight as well. But then they gave it majority decision to Tyron Woodley. So he had two with the current champ, with Tyron Woodley being as good as, like, people forget about Tyron Woodley's actual greatness because of what happened with Jake Paul and what he did afterwards and his fall off. But he's honestly one of the greatest too. He's top 5 welterweights. He gotta be top 6, top 7, maybe around there. But either way, Wonderboy went with this guy toe to toe, a wrestler on top of that. That's most of his losses are against wrestlers, if not all of them. Gilbert Burns had to wrestle him. Gilbert Burns is not a wrestler. He realized the threat. Bilal Muhammad wrestled him for the whole fight, just held him against the cage and wrestled him. And that's
these guys, and I don't want to use, but these guys aren't even finishing him. Like, the only guy to finish him on the ground is Shavkat. Gilbert Burns couldn't do it. He's black belt. People talk so good about Gilbert Burns. I'm not saying his jiu-jitsu wasn't good, but it's not even as good as Shavkat's, because Shavkat was able to do it. So that shows you how good Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's jiu-jitsu defense is. So, you know, his wrestling is really his downfall, and that's the only reason most of the time that when he lost, it was because he doesn't have the wrestling, and it's also because of his stance and his karate style, which also led to the lack of defensive wrestling. But even so,
the only person I believe to really finish him was Anthony Pettis, and it was with a Superman punch off the cage. And that's the thing about Anthony Pettis. He's either one of the greatest fighters or he looks pretty bad. But during that time, Pettis still looked good. He was still doing things in that division until he wasn't. But after that, I feel like after that fight, his stand-up evolved more. His defensive stand-up got a lot better because of that fight. And he was beating Pettis. He was beating him. And he just read the wrong punch. He threw a check hook when he shouldn't have. And Pettis caught him with an amazing athletic Superman punch off the cage. So that's the only one we can really think of. And Pettis was a former champ as well. So it's not like he's fighting some bum again. He's losing to the best. And
Bilal Muhammad, he's getting a title shot against Leon.
Exactly.
Burns has gotten title shots multiple times. Or no, it was just once against Usman. But Burns only loses to guys like Usman, and that's it. Bilal. And Bilal is the only other guy as of recently that's beat Gilbert Burns.
And Hamzat as well beat Gilbert Burns.
Yeah, Hamzat.
But that was a very close fight. It could have went either way as well.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, like, young blood, and he's older. He is. He's hit that peak already.
And honestly, now we talk about Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns could arguably be in this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Now that you say that, I believe so too. He's beat the best dudes, some of the best dudes too, and he's only lost to Hamzat and Usman, like you were just saying.
But the only thing is, when you look at Burns' career, and then he's had, like, right now, Burns is doing better than Wonderboy. But when you look at all the wins that Burns has had, he's had really good wins. But then I just look at one win from Wonderboy, Kevin Holland, when he demolished Kevin Holland and TKO'd him, the first person to TKO Kevin Holland in the UFC. So that is a better win than any win that I can recall off the top of my head from Gilbert Burns. So
Gilbert Burns beat Masvidal. Wonderboy beat Masvidal. evens out, you know, and that's honestly Gilbert Burns' best win more of recently, you know, and then that's a while ago still. It's still some years ago. I mean, granted, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson beat him years ago too, but it's
And even though like he beat Masvidal wasn't the same fighter anymore. You know, he's a little bit slower. It was obvious his age got to him. So
and Wonderboy beat him when he was on that scale to his prime, on his way up to his full prime, and then Gilbert got him towards the end. So which one do you really want to like? So it could go either way, but I still believe Wonderboy, mainly because of longevity. He's been there a little longer than Gilbert and got more wins for sure.
Yeah, and had closer fights for the title. Because Gilbert Burns, his fight for the title, he got knocked out by Usman. So yeah, we gotta give it to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson because of what he's still doing now and what he did back whenever he was in his prime and even out of his prime. Still fast twitch muscles, still as athletic as ever, and man,
he honestly doesn't look as he's like out of his prime. It's a weird thing to say
because he's kind of not.
Yeah, he's
kind of in his prime.
Yeah, he maybe not. We'll see, but
he kind of is because Kevin Holland win was the best performance I've ever seen.
That's true, but then right after he loses to Shavkat. Granted, it's
Shavkat, so it's like he's only losing to younger guys that are on their way for the title that are more hungry than him. Let's be honest. Shavkat, Gilbert Burns, Bilal, these guys are going to be more hungry than Wonderboy because Wonderboy's been in this game for so long. So we got to give credit to Wonderboy. He's the best welterweight to never win a title.
Next up, we got middleweight. And this one was tough mainly because it's like there's a lot of middleweights that we could have chose from, but the ones that caught our eye the most, in our opinions, we think the top two dudes to never win gold, and we had to do these two because it was too hard to choose one or the other. We got Yoel Romero and Dan Henderson.
Yeah, and the reason we got Yoel Romero is because he's had so many title fights, or so many fights, I mean, to where they should have went his way. Almost all of his losses, almost in the UFC, were robberies. Robert Whittaker, split decision, that should have went his way. It was a close fight, but it was pretty clear he won with the knockdowns. He won, I remember we watched that fight pretty recently. We rewatched it with an unbiased, open mind, and Yoel Romero should have won that when you score it round by round. And against Izzy, we didn't rewatch that fight recently, but from what I remember, he was the one landing the more powerful shots, and Izzy was on the back foot landing the leg kicks. Izzy should have lost that fight. Paulo Costa, a banger, one of the best middleweight fights of all time, and it should have went to Yoel Romero's way. It was a really close fight, but I remember thinking Yoel should have won that fight. And so when you look at his career, he's had so many close fights that should have went his way. 2 of them were for the title, and his only other loss was against Whittaker. And Yoel Romero on the come up was a scary dude. Like, even though he was reaching his 40s, he was in his prime. Like, imagine if he had came to the UFC even sooner, you know, during like Anderson Silva's time, he probably would have been fighting Anderson Silva. It would have been those 2 guys the best in the middleweight division. He came into the UFC just knocking everybody out. Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, beating Lyoto. He was looking like a scary force in the division. Elite wrestling, Olympic wrestling, I believe, and so much power and athleticism. And man, Yoel, he was just, honestly, he was one of my favorite fighters. You know, he was such an entertaining fighter to watch for the most part. And, you know, the only times he's ever lost a fight, 3 of those 4 fights should have went his way.
Yeah.
So we got to give it to Yoel.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly as well. Like, he was knocking, like you said, he was knocking everyone out. Even, I think he knocked out Brad Tavares and Derek Brunson too, a little bit. You know, more recent fighters too. It wasn't just some old fighters or older fighters that he beat. He was in there with the young guys, the new guys, the old guys. He was in there with a lot of people in the short career that he did have. I don't want to say short because it was extensive enough, but for the amount of time, it's like, damn, what if Yoel started training like 5, 6, 7 years ago? And if he did, he'd probably be in the same position, if not a way better position, because he would have more time.
He probably would have been a champion and one of the GOATs. My personal opinion, if he would have started MMA sooner and came to the UFC sooner, he probably would have been a champion or one of the GOATs. He probably had a style, in my opinion, in hindsight. He probably has a style to beat a guy like Anderson Silva. With the wrestling, the athleticism, the power, the chin.
The explosiveness
The explosiveness, like, it's hard. You're not knocking this dude out. Yoel Romero's never been knocked out in the UFC or even outside of the UFC. and I think he would have had a good style against Anderson Silva is what I'm saying here. So
the other guy we're gonna bring up here for middleweight was Dan Henderson, and Dan Henderson, you gotta know him for his right hand. That was deadly. He can hit you at any time, and it was gonna be done. He was all the way back from Pride times where I was real little. You know what I mean? Not even understanding anything. He was fighting from then to where I was able to assess the fights and understand what's going on. Then, and even then, later on, he's older in his 40s as well, still putting in work, knocking dudes out. He beat the likes of Bisping and some of the GOATs we got. We got Shogun, Fedor. Even though those were bigger weight classes, that wasn't technically middleweight. Doesn't matter. He's a middleweight going up and down between middleweight and light heavyweight, and that has to count for something. So that's why he's more on the precipice of middleweight. I'll give him because I think he looked better in middleweight. Granted, he has amazing wins, probably bigger names in light heavyweight. Like he fought Rampage. I believe he lost by decision. He went to decision where Rampage was on a tear during that time. So the fact that he was a pioneer, and sometimes it was flip-flop. He would lose and then he would win, he would lose, but who's he losing to? Lyoto Machida, Rampage Jackson, Anderson Silva, Daniel Cormier. You know, like these guys are on the list of greatest of all time.
And like almost all those guys you named were light heavyweights.
Yeah, most of those guys were light heavyweights, but still, he's going back and forth between middleweight, and that's the tough part. We could have put him in light heavyweight as well, and I feel like that's why it's better to end off on this because he was more in between.
But he was more of a middleweight.
Yeah, it was more of a middleweight, more in the beginning of his career through Pride and different things like that. But as he got older, it got harder to make weight. But even so, he showed that skill, that power, that right hand, no matter who wanted it, he could get it. And even at the end of his career, he fought Bisping in his last fight, and he knocked him down with that same right. He almost finished Bisping once again and knocked out Hector Lombard, which is kind of insane too. Hector Lombard is a huge middleweight.
And for light heavyweight, we got another one of my favorite fighters of all time. Rest in peace. You know who it is. The GOAT, Anthony Johnson. And man, his legacy was amazing. Especially, I might be a little bit glazing here because he's one of my favorite fighters, but he was such a scary dude. And that's not a glaze, that's a fact, man. Like, he was knocking out pretty much everybody. Gustafson, Glover, and man, the only fighter he's lost to in the UFC at light heavyweight was Daniel Cormier. And man, that's Daniel Cormier. And even I heard some people, trying to say that he threw the fight. I don't think he threw the fight, but he was shooting for takedowns and he made some bad decisions to where, and I don't remember which fight it was, the first or second.
I believe it was the second fight.
The second fight, where he was going for takedowns when that's not his strong suit. But man, he's only lost to guys like Daniel Cormier at light heavyweight. He was one of the nightmare matchups for John Jones. A lot of people were thinking, man, this Anthony Johnson guy, he might knock out John Jones. And I think I was thinking that too because he has so much power. But, man, Anthony Johnson was knocking out the likes of Glover Teixeira, Alexander Gustafsson. And this was Gustafsson after fighting John Jones the first time to where he looked good. It wasn't like
out of prime.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was out of his prime. And I think after Gustafsson lost to Anthony Johnson, he went on to beat Glover Teixeira and knock out Glover Teixeira. So Gustafsson was still doing well. It wasn't like this was an old, beat down Gustafsson. And Anthony Johnson demolished him.
Yeah,
and
made him look silly.
Made him look silly. So Anthony Johnson did that to most of the guys he fought. And I know we're talking about UFC here, but he even went on to Bellator and was fighting with cancer. Knocking dudes out with cancer. That's notable. So he's a freaking savage. Rest in peace. He's a BMF. And yeah, he's the greatest light heavyweight in my opinion. And not win a title.
And his light heavyweight resume isn't the longest either. This is more of the what if and the aura. The only other person I can compare the type of aura, it's different. There's still two different auras, but as similar I can get of an aura you can get to current day is Alex Pereira. Just a monster. Like if you see him on the other side of the cage, some fireworks is about to happen. Anthony Johnson was there in every fight. The only fights, like you said, was DC. Was like kind of lackluster, but that's DC. He knows how to subdue people. He knows how to get them to slow down and really you know, and make it look easy at times.
And Anthony Johnson was lighting DC up on the feet as long as it stayed on the feet.
Yeah, as long as it stayed on the feet, exactly. DC had nothing against him, but DC's an Olympic wrestler. He's going to use what his strong suit is, especially against a guy that dangerous. So that's why we're putting him here. And there's a lot of fighters that Anthony Johnson, if he was still here to this day, he'd be in the top 5, top 3. If not, he could possibly be the champ. You never know. Like with the type of fighters they got right now, with Pereira, Prohaska, like his style would match really well against those guys. And the only time Anthony Johnson's been knocked out was whenever he had to cut like 50 pounds to hit welterweight. So it's like this dude was at welterweight, and then you look at the pictures from before he was then until now. It's like, damn, why was he just never at light heavyweight? He's more natural, and it's kind of crazy to see. He's the second or tied with Yoel Romero, the biggest what ifs in this division in UFC. And then finally we got heavyweight. And this one I believe too is a long shot. There's probably a few guys you could say that never won the title that is the greatest, but in my opinion, or both of our opinions, we believe that's by far Alistair Overeem. And this dude, ever since Pride days, he's been knocking dudes out, the best of the best. Like he got wins over the likes of Sergey Pavlovich, that's currently number 2 or 3 right now, I believe. He got wins over Werdum, Mark Hunt, Junior Dos Santos, Frank Mir, and I can just keep going on. And a lot of those guys have either been champions or are on the GOAT list for sure. And it's kind of insane. Like, dang, how did this dude just, every time he got close, every time he get put to sleep. And that's another thing. Almost every single fight he's been in, either he's knocking the dude out or he's getting knocked out. It's just always one of those fights. He's so exciting to watch. Even whenever he's getting knocked out, no offense, but usually when he's the one given the knockouts, like, damn, that was deadly. It's like,
it looks like whenever he was knocking dudes out, it looked super technical for heavyweight.
It did, and he's like one of the most traditional kickboxers of that day, of that era. He made it look not like wild, and he looked more crisp whenever it was his time. But then it was whenever the heavyweights got wild and touched his chin, that was the only time. But that's the thing about heavyweight. You get touched once, you can drop, and you're done. But Alistair, he had so much potential, and I thought at one point he did win. When I was younger, I thought, oh, isn't he the champ? I remember telling my dad, because every time I seen Alistair, it was him putting somebody to sleep. But then some of the greatest like Cain Velasquez, and even you can even say Ben Rothwell. He's a good fighter. He was a good heavyweight during his time too, in his prime. Lost to the likes of him, Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades. You know, these guys are current day fighters now. These are only dudes he's losing to. He don't lose to plumbers and firefighters. No offense to Stipe. I mean, he's a firefighter, but he's a UFC fighter first at the end of the day. So it's a lot of the guys all the guys he beat were top contenders, top 10. And ever since he's been in there, he's always been in the top 15, top 10, and just putting people flatlining them.
Yeah, man, and it's really his longevity too. I mean, he started his career at a very early age and ended his career at a super late age. And even at a late age, out of his prime, beating Sergey Pavlovich is probably the most impressive win on his career. Like, to do that to Sergey Pavlovich, and you see how good Pavlovich is, and he just dominated Pavlovich. So that was very impressive. And Overeem, his longevity, his style, the way it is, either you knock him out or he's knocking you out. He's having a war almost every single fight. It's a fun, entertaining war. It's a fun scrap. And like you said, man, he beat so many names. Like, when you look at his resume and you look at the names he beat, even if you're a casual, you're like, oh, I know that guy, I know this guy. As you scroll down the resume and you look, oh, I heard that guy's name, I seen this guy. There's so many notable wins when you look through his career and his losses. He's only losing, like you said, to Stipe and Curtis Blades, who's fighting for an interim belt against Tom Aspinall, and Francis Ngannou, who's probably top 3, not probably, he's top 3 heavyweights of all time. So what he did and the fact that he was never able to win a title is very impressive. So we got to give it to Alistair Overeem, man. When you look at his resume and you look at the body of work and what he did throughout his career, 100%, in our opinion, the greatest heavyweight to never win a title because of his accomplishments.
For sure, and we definitely got to give respect to all of these fighters. All these fighters on the list. We wish you won the title at one point, you know, but y'all couldn't. You know, it's just the way it's stacked up. The better fighter, always the champions. The GOATs are the ones that beat these guys. The greatest of all times, all of them. They're the only ones to beat these guys. So it's like, give them their flowers, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to get in the UFC alone, let alone building up a resume like Overeem did, or beating the guys and knocking out the guys that Anthony Johnson did, and having close fights with Israel Adesanya like Yoel Romero, and what these guys did throughout their career, and the fact that they weren't able to accomplish that gold and win that title, we have to give them their respect, man.
100%. And that'll wrap it up, guys. Thank you for joining us here. We're the MMA Bros. I'm Nate.
I'm Elijah.
We hope you guys have a great night.